Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. I'm excited for today's conversation because we're diving deep into the world of EdTech and data-driven tools to support that, and how we can give teachers back their most valuable resource, time. Joining me is Chris Hull, co-founder and president of Otus, a platform that is designed by teachers for teachers to streamline assessments, data management, and student insights. Chris started as a 7th grade social studies teacher and made the leap from the classroom to the C-suite while building Otus from the ground up to support educators in a way that truly makes a difference. He shares his story about why one-to-one devices in his classroom created a pathway for Otus. And in this episode, we talk about his journey, the challenges of transitioning from teaching to tech, and how Otus is reshaping the way schools leverage student data. Plus, we'll explore how AI's role in education and what it does and why it's not about replacing teachers, but empowering them, and what the future of EdTech could look like in 5 years. So we hope that you'll pull up a chair, grab a phone, grab a friend, your favorite beverage, and as always, let's get ready to do this. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Leena Marie Saleh, the EdTech Guru. I want to thank you so much for spending time with me on this journey, for all the support that you give me, and for following along. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and let's get ready. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Chris Hull of Otus. He is the CEO and president. Chris, how are you doing today?
Doing great. I can't believe that the weather's so much warmer in Chicago, so I'm living the life. Can't beat it.
Yeah, that's nice. We had a bit of snow here and it was tragic in Houston. You know, we're not used to having the snow, so I'm sure it's nice for you to have a little bit of the warmer weather.
I mean, when you're talking about 30s and 40s in the middle of the, early winter, you can't beat it. I am jealous.
Ooh,
I
it's a
just
heat
have a
wave.
good mindset. It is. A couple of weeks ago it was at like negative something. So we're
Yeah.
we're like 40 degrees warmer now. You can't
Yeah.
beat it.
So hey, that's a win in my book. All right, so we're going to kick off today just sharing a little bit about who you are and basically your journey to Otus.
Yeah, definitely. So really, my name's Chris. Also, I was a 7th grade social studies teacher, and the story of Otus. Otus is an educational technology platform, really trying to help educators save time because there's nothing more valuable to educators than time while providing them insights. Because one of the hardest things to do as a teacher is to connect to your kids. And so the story of Otis really starts in my classroom, and I was at a school named Elm Place Middle School. I always like to throw out a plug to one of my favorite places. My kids actually go to that district. Um, so when I was teaching, I wasn't able to do in some ways what my predecessors were able to do. How do we really get to know kids? How are we able to understand, who they are? What are they interested in? What are they able to do? And what are they needing to learn to get better? And so almost in 2010, I received a grant to go one-to-one. So one device to every kid. And at first it was first generation iPads, and then it was actually Chromebooks. And what quickly became apparent once we add the technology in the classroom is that the information became siloed. And I was spending so much time piecing it together, it still is taking too much time. And so I was like, man, there has to be an answer. And I always turn to technology to make me more efficient. Sometimes I say to make me less lazy, but allow me to really have that time. And so we built Otus, which is really a unified platform where we take all of this information about kids, collecting it from the student information system, their classes, their grade levels, their demographics, connecting it to their diagnostic and state assessments, and connecting it to the notes and the history of their previous performance to really give you this comprehensive profile of who they are. And with that information, when I was still teaching, I was able to make such a better impact on my kids. And it's not necessarily the tool alone, but it allowed me to focus more on that teaching and learning. And so we began to grow Otus. And really, we've been able to see it get into, we're in over 35 states. We're used by hundreds of thousands of students. And so now I'm just excited to talk about it. I mean, I've been able to listen to a couple of your podcasts. They're absolutely amazing, highlighting all the amazing work that needs to be done to really help students.
Oh, I really appreciate that. So I guess something that we didn't talk about pre question. Obviously, you were building Otus in the background, and you were seeing how much of an impact that needed. So, what made you make the decision of obviously moving full time out of the classroom and to full time, building Otus from, where it came from? I know that's always a tricky question, but I think it's an important one.
Yeah, I always think there's a tipping point, right? I believe that there's serendipity in life and there are moments that just kind of happen, and all of a sudden it's really about seizing that opportunity. And so for me, it really comes down to balance, being able to balance everything. So in 2010, I went one-to-one with my other co-founder, the sixth grade social studies teacher, and we had agreed to do all the curriculum development, all the professional development. And in 2013, we started building Otus. So I was in that world of trying to figure it out. And then from 2013 to 2016, 17, we were building and growing, and I was listening and I was learning. But my life was continuing. We talk about that. And it really came down to I tell people I'm not always the smartest person, but my wife and I are beyond fortunate to have 4 kids. And so in January of 2018, we had twins. And so I had 4 kids under 4. So at that moment, I was doing Otus, teaching seventh grade social studies, and trying to be the best father and husband and member of my family as I could. And it became really apparent that we were beginning to grow. That was really where the growth started to happen. And I was like, man, if I am going to really give it my all to this idea, I have to commit to one or the other. And it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had. And it was something to where I was noticing that, man, am I doing what's best for my kids? Am I spending all of those hours that I need to? And I was like, well, I can't do everything. And so in May, at the end of the school year in May, I actually took a sabbatical, and I was like, hey, I'm going to try this. I'm going to kind of see how this is going to go. And I was fortunate enough to continue to have Otus grow and continue to do that. And so then I ended up having to retire a couple of years later. And we had actually talked about this in the pre-show in our conversation. I did leave at a time where my building, Elm Place, was actually, there are 3 middle schools in our district, and Elm Place was closing. And so I was able to kind of say, hey, Elm Place is closing. I'd been in the same school, in the same community. We had an amazing group of teachers. And it was like, hey, this is clearly something's telling me this is the time.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting because I think sometimes people's tipping point is, oh, I need to leave the classroom. I need to make this transition. But I like that your story is a bit different in that it was more of a personal decision. Obviously the timing of everything kind of worked out in a perfect way, but I think it's important that sometimes people don't make the decisions necessarily for families or those types of things. It's just like the environment in the classroom. So I think it's nice to know that your passion just, didn't push you out. It just kind of transitioned into a new venture.
Yeah, I think when you talk to a lot of people, I still am friends with so many of my, former teacher colleagues, and there is sometimes a time where that passion or the struggles or the administrative work or the tensions kind of cause you like, I've kind of had enough. I still look back at teaching as an amazingly fond memory, something that I tell myself I want to do. I tell myself, eventually I kind of want to, in 10 years, 15 years, I want to go back and I want to teach for a couple more. I feel like I still have more teaching to do. I'm able to coach my kids, so I feel like I'm able to do a little bit of it. But yeah, it's interesting. I talk to a lot of people about it, and it's important that you reflect on what's going to be the best for you.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Okay, so let's shift a little bit into obviously how is Opus, or sorry, excuse me, let me try this again. How is Otus different from other service providers and its potential, obviously, to disrupt the industry, which I think is the work that you're doing?
And I think it comes down to the very fundamental structure of how something is built. We really see at the core of everything the student. So the student is like the single most foundational entity of everything. When you look at a traditional learning management system, it was really adapted or adopted from the college higher education space, where you would have a syllabus, you would have a course plan of this is how it's going to go. You would teach the same section over and over and over again, and you were managing the resources. You were managing the progression, the sequence, the scope. And really, Otus is geared towards, hey, it's about the student. So there's a student profile, and in that profile, everything's collected from, again, their classes, their teachers, their family information, their past performance. So our structure is different, and that does create some interesting, I would say, challenges where there is, if you go from a different system that's more of an LMS or a formatted for like the school or for the class, there is a shift because the entire navigation and theory behind Otus is that it lives first with the kid. Because I believe from pre-K to 12th grade, if a kid can't, again, my kids are in like first grade and third grade, if a kid can't add, how are they all of a sudden going to get the fractions? If a kid can't, subtract, double digit numbers, how are they all of a sudden going to be able to multiply in these things? Like you can't all of a sudden skip. In higher education, you miss 2 weeks. Well, that's on you to catch up. If all of a sudden you have to go home for something, it's like on you to catch up. Well, I really think at the core, it has to be at the kid and meeting where they're at and being able to understand how do we engage with them, because without the students engaged, the learning can't happen. And so at the fundamental piece, that's where everything's different in Otus. And so we're really geared towards the student. We're also really geared towards data. And that means that we want to be able to measure apples to apples. And so in a lot of ways, we originally were a free tool for teachers. And we quickly learned if you want to compare how a student is doing in English to math to social studies, or even in elementary, if you're trying to take these skills that you're teaching in science or a PE activity, you have to be using the same unit of measurement. You have to be using the same grading scale. You have to be using the same language. If we're trying to communicate this to families and to our colleagues, we can't all of a sudden have all these different policies and practices. And so because of our fundamental need to focus on the kid and the desire to make the communication of progress more efficient and effective, we've made some choices that mean, yeah, there's going to be a common grading scale. Oh, there's going to be a common way to calculate how somebody is doing. And then there's going to be a common language so that all can happen, so that we can really engage with the teaching and learning and the facilitation of what needs to happen next.
Yeah, I think that's an important factor, and something that I actually was talking to someone, when you go to conferences and the first thing somebody asks is, well, are you free or are you paid? I think the biggest differentiator of something that is paid and something that is free, this isn't always the case, obviously, but with an edtech tool that's based around purely education, it allows you to basically build tools to actually better suit the educator and listen to those needs, because free isn't free, right? Somebody has to pay for that from somewhere. So I think that's often like a misnomer. I think when people are looking at evaluating a tool, they're like, oh, well, it's just free or it's just this. It's like money's coming from somewhere to support this. So it's not actually free. It's either coming from donations or it's coming from you, in which you're able to better listen to them as a service provider.
It also allows you to be more ambitious, right? And one of the problems that I faced when, we were first going one-to-one is that all of these individual tools could do one thing well, but then suddenly I'm managing 15 tools, or all of a sudden the data is in 15 places. In addition, I think you said it, like there, the social studies teacher, it's like, there is no such thing as a free lunch someone's paying, or the bill's going to come later. And I think one of the most frustrating things when I'm talking to educators, it's the same question. It's like, yeah, in the short term, it's great for free, but do I really want to be reinventing my platform and strategy every 3 years, 4 years? And it's one of those things where we really have the ability, because of that financial structure, we know what we're going to be. We know we're not going to all of a sudden have to do it. Now, it does mean too, though, that you're talking about a very ambitious thing we're trying to build. And that's exciting, but it's also meaning, yeah, would it be great if every teacher could have their own grading scale? Yeah. But is that really best if you're a student and you have 9 teachers and all of a sudden it's like, well, how you do? Well, in this class, it's like, there's kind of this catch-22. Like, I love the autonomy I had as a teacher, especially social studies. We don't have to, we're not the English and the math in middle school. You kind of get a little bit more freedom, but you need to be in collaboration. And sometimes that collaboration means compromise. And that means you're going to kind of find that commonality that's going to allow it to be better for everyone.
Yep, I totally agree with that. Data is something that's important to me and I think should be an important influential decider for most educators. When they're using things, I know they try to skew away from data, but data is something that we use, obviously, in the technology side, the tech side of things, but also something that teachers really need for students. So how are data-driven insights revolutionizing teacher support?
I think it allows teachers to realize that what they are seeing and observing is a form of data. But you want to be able to, take this qualitative and back it up with the quantitative. And I think one of the pieces that I try to explain when I talk to teachers is, I always say data is a four-letter word. It's like it doesn't mean though that it can't be used in the right way. I don't think we should be data blind. I don't think that's really the question. Like I know there are students who sometimes might be struggling with tests or having anxiety, but there's something there that's going to unlock that. You might be able to say, hey, on the formative tests, they're crushing it, but then all of a sudden on the state or the diagnostic, they're not. Like, what is it? Well, then you might want to look at like how much time are they, what's their behavior, or how are they feeling that day. There's some type of evidence that needs to be unlocked. But in addition, I guess, not in addition, but like really why data matters is you're not going to bat 100%. I used to have 150 students, and some students I just connected, I understood, I saw it. But for the students that are a little bit more challenging to pinpoint, like where are they? What do I really need to unlock for them? This data is information to paint a more complete picture. And then as you zoom out, yeah, the teachers who are in that classroom are going to have this feel of how it's going, but we need to be able to make it tangible for that articulation of what's happening for the other teachers. I can't tell you how many times it's like, well, in my classroom, they're doing great. It's like, okay, well, we have to talk more than the quality of like what's really happening. And when they go from sixth grade to seventh grade to eighth grade, how do we articulate that? How do we actually communicate that? And then at the administrative level, how do we get these insights for the groups of kids? And I think that's really where data is so transformative, because it allows you to take something that can be done at a small scale, connecting to a handful of kids, but allows you to make an impact that can be much larger because you can able to communicate it. But it also allows you to really be able to scale it so that more than just you are able to do it, and so that you're able to connect to more, and then your entire school and district are able to do it, be able to help more and more kids.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think oftentimes as educators, we have a lot of qualitative, information. We're like, oh, exactly what you said. This person's doing really well in my classroom. It's like, well, what is it that they're doing well? What exactly is that? And is that being, objective? Are you really objectively saying that? Or is that just like your opinion on how they're doing in your classroom? So I think data is really important, because it's also important when you're looking back and you have a student that comes to you that doesn't know how to read or is super, super advanced, and they're like, oh, well, they did so good. It's like, okay, well, what is it that they're doing? I like to go back and look at their test data. I like to be able to have numbers to be, supporting their academic initiative, so I can understand where they are as a student, not just from a personality standpoint, but how can I make them achieve at a greater level?
And I think that data allows you to have that specificity, right? You're able to really break down a skill and into it. I like to say standards informed grading, or standards informed instruction. It's really what I like to say. Standards informed instruction. Let's use a simple skill, right? You might have some assignment or activity that might be measuring like four different skills. Well, if we use this standard informed instruction, we can say, okay, which part of this are they struggling with? And, I think we do that with a lot of other things. Like if we're looking at sports, if, I played basketball, it's like, oh, are you good at shooting? Are you good at shooting from where? Are you good at rebound? It's like, we have these numbers to be able to quantify something I might be able to see, but it allows you to then pinpoint what to do. And I think in instruction, we sometimes don't want to label a kid with a number. And that's never what we want to do. But we want to be able to have this wide range of data with some qualitative, with a lot of quantitative. And with that wide range, we can paint such a more complete picture, so then we can really pinpoint what has to happen.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just important. Yeah, we're not saying a student, you're this number. Where I have been in districts where they've done that, but it's more so looking back and being, how can we really make greater gains for this student, or really understand the student in a more holistic way, I think. So yeah, I love that. Okay, so we know the educational landscape is continuously evolving and changing. How is Otus staying adaptable and responsive to changes in educational standards and practices?
I think one of our core tenets, one of the things we believe we try to make sure it's everywhere we go, is we want to listen and we want to learn. We want to be able to have that empathy to the fact that we need to be able to understand what our teachers and administrators and students, but also families really encountering. And that's changed, from 2018, 19, it was different than when it was during the pandemic to even now. But we really see with Otus, we're trying to solve three main problems. One, we want to be able to have a comprehensive or complete understanding of who a kid is with this profile. And if we can understand who they are at a single kid, we can then look at groups. The other two problems that we really focus on really require us to constantly be adapting because they change. And the first one is the technical literacy of educators and families varies wildly. And so, how do we make the technology as easy as possible? That has to change. When people were first learning how to use their cell phones, things were a little bit more difficult for them or complex, or they had never done it before. Well, now they're getting more and more used to it. Well, now it's like, oh, I can do that. I do it in like 6 of my apps, or I do it on my iPhone all the time. Suddenly we become so much more used to it, we can then do it. And the same comes from the the literacy of being able to do this data. Like, can we understand the data literacy of what's happening? Well, the first time you're looking at data, can you do a pivot table? Can you do, a correlative analysis? Like, that can be difficult. So what we want to do is we want to continually learn, how do we tweak our platform and our program and our tools to make it easier? And the best example I have right now is actually a word that I know we see everywhere, which is just, AI. Oh, artificial intelligence. Like, how is that helping? Well, for us, we want the AI to make things easier by how easy would it be to build for example, a drag and drop question or a highlight question? Well, that can be kind of tricky. Like, what do I put here? We're not there quite yet, but we're getting pretty close. How easy would it be to say, I want to create a drag and drop question with 4 answers, just typing out what you want, and this is where we are going with AI. And the other piece would go to, instead of having to look at a graph or a visualization, how great would it be? And this is what we actually just delivered, the ability to just ask a question. How are my students doing on this standard? What could I do next on this standard? And it's just using your natural language ability to be able to get those answers. So we really believe that technology really needs to be a tool to assist you, to be able to augment what a teacher is able to do. Because if we can augment these administrative tasks, if we can augment the data analysis, then there's more time for what's never going to be replaced, which is connecting to students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like how you're using AI as a tool to meet them at their level, because I think that's really important. I think data can be really difficult sometimes to understand and to really break down at a core level. So if you can do it more strategically, or really meeting a teacher where they are and what data are they exactly looking for, maybe the AI can really point something really strategic or really specific that they're looking for. So I think it's great to hear that you're adapting in that, in that way, and kind of tweaking.
It meets them where they're at. And then the other piece is, I know, you taught for, over a decade too. It's teaching can be kind of lonely. Like, you have your grade book, you have your information, your kids. We think the AI could be just the place to bounce ideas. Am I reading this graph right? Am I seeing this right? Again, what standards are my kids struggling at? Well, I have this qualitative view of what's happening. I have my grade book that I can analyze, but if I also can then have the conversation, oh, wait, does this? Oh, wait. And all of a sudden you can really get to the core of what it is, because too often you're all by yourself and you just want that person to bounce ideas off of, to be like, hey, am I reading this right? Man, I think I am. It's like we see that assurance or that confidence level also being a big help, saving the time and also giving more confidence in what they're seeing.
Yeah, I think there's a really big thing that you've said a lot throughout this, is giving teachers back time. And I think that's what we're all working for, right? To give teachers time, because we just know how time poor they are. And so anything that we can do to help alleviate that in any capacity is something that we're really striving to do. Something that I just thought about as we were kind of talking and things is, a lot of times ed tech companies are born from a view from the outside. and not a view from the inside. So, having your educator background and building a product while you are still in the classroom and kind of transitioning, how do you think that's helped to strengthen your foundation of building and understanding the product of Otus?
Yeah, I think it comes from understanding there is nuance and complexity. No classroom is really identical. And it's one of those things I always tell people, I always like to use simple ways. The seventh grade teacher always comes back, where I really struggle with the term ed tech because I think it's really education technology. And when I look at companies, a lot of them are really good at the education or they're really good at the technology, but very, very few are able to really find that balance. And so how do you become like education technology and not shortchange either side? And I believe that even though I left the classroom in 2018, the with the knowledge I have that you have to be listening and learning from those educators, we're never going to stop listening. And even though it is going to adapt, I go back and tell people, I remember the teachers who were my mentors. They were telling me that the days of Microsoft Office and documents where they had all these like naming, and I'm like, well, I have Google Docs. Like, what do you mean? Like, it just auto updates. Like, how do you do? And it's like, if I was using the information I had just from back then, like it didn't change and it didn't adapt. And it's like we have to be understanding. And I think your questions in this conversation really show that. And it's really with that reflective nature to know I don't know exactly what it is like to be in the classroom in 2025. I don't. But I also know that it's essential that we're listening to those that are, and we're also listening to the families and the importance of family engagement and the importance of being able to say, hey, what reporting needs or instructional needs do administrators have? Like the fact that we're able to have that empathy and the ability to have that insight, I think gives us that head start to really be able to develop it. And it's something we never want to lose. And I do think it's part of, the secret sauce that is Otus.
Yeah, I think so. I can tell from your passion and from, just you sharing your insights about that I can feel that. I also wanted to touch on something because I think during the pandemic we saw a really good opportunity. We saw a lot of educators and school districts and school leaders bringing parents alongside for the ride. Then the pandemic went, everything kind of went back to the way it was, and we just shut the doors again. So I've heard you mention a couple of times, peppered out throughout your questions, is really involving parents and really having parents understand the nature of what their students are doing and how they're thriving. So can you talk a little bit about how you're helping to support schools, districts, teachers to really bring those parents as stakeholders in the conversation?
Yeah, I think that, so again, I have 4 kids and I'm really fortunate. I was able to use Otus as an administrator, a teacher, and my kids use Otus. And I think one of the simplest way I look at it is if you ask your kid how school went or what they're learning, they're very unreliable narrators to their own learning experience. If I ask my 10-year-old what they did at school, they're going to tell me about the bus ride home or what happened at recess or, their drama with their friends, which is all valid and good. Like, I want to know that. But is she going to be able to articulate to me that she is learning how to use textual evidence to support her ideas? No, I mean, she doesn't think like that. There's like no way. If I ask I have first grade twins. I have asked them what they're learning. Are they going to tell me they're working on double digit, addition? No, it's like they're not going to have that. I always like to say that, often your kids are going to give you a 4-letter answer. I don't know, like, what do you learn? It's like, I don't know. And all these things. And it's like, what is it? Like nothing. And it's like, I don't know. And it's one of those things where if you ask high schoolers, they're going to give you completely different answers. But again, just as vague and it's not about the learning. And so what Otus does is we really allow you to see this information. How are they doing on the state test or the common assessment they just took? How are they progressing? You can even see, my students, they do standards-based learning. I can see the standard they're working on, how many times they've attempted that standard, how they've progressed on that standard. And, I always look back, my now fifth grader was struggling on the ability to understand, this is in third grade, the ability to understand how a character's traits impacted their decision making in a story. Well, I could then ask them while reading, a book, right now, Percy Jackson's what we're reading right now. It's, why did Percy Jackson do this? Or, when we're reading Harry Potter, it's like, again, it's such a simple question, but I would never have known that's the skill that she was needing extra practice on. And so that's what Otus really does. It kind of gives you a really great look into the teaching and learning being done and the progress in a way that we believe allows you to ask questions without having to clarify things. And we actually see AI coming there, like being able to put this information maybe into language that they can understand. I'm rambling a little bit, but one of the things that was really cool, we were working with a district and they were talking about, man, how do you explain standards-based grading to your family community? It's a really hard question in the elementary level. And it's like, okay, well, what do you do? And, the person we were talking with was, a mechanic. And they were all of a sudden talking about, well, standards-based grading is actually what happens when you go to a mechanic. It's like, you're not just saying, oh, your car is good, drive it. Like, how helpful is that? It's like, no, this is how your transmission is running. This is how your engine is running. This is where your fluids are. This is where XYZ, this is where your brake pads are. It's like, oh, he's like, oh, you're just breaking down each part and it adds up to it. Oh, it's drivable now. I'm like, yes. And I'm like, I never would have been able to come up with that. I've been teaching and doing this for a while. I've been talking to people and it was like, again, AI wasn't replacing me, but it was helping me brainstorm something that was able to allow me to communicate this. And then that parent all of a sudden was like, oh, I get it. Another parent we were talking to is a football coach. That's what he does. And he just loves football. And we were like, oh, well, it's like, you wouldn't want to say like, how did my son do? Or how did my daughter do? Or how did this happen? It's like, oh, we won the game. No, it's like, what was their, how did they block? Or how many yards did they have after contact? Or whatever the statistics are, you're able to really tell a story that's much more detailed. And we believe that type of transparency and communication is really going to benefit everybody because it's going to bring more engagement for the students, more engagement for the families. And when you have high engagement amongst both those groups, you achieve better results.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting way actually to pull AI in, is to kind of have parents see it in a different perspective, because they often, if they're not educators like we were, like we would know the questions to ask, or we think we do, right? And then if you're not related to that field, like my sister, she's not a teacher and she'll often ask me questions and I'm like, okay, well, it's, to me, it's very simple to like understand and break down. But to somebody who's not attached to the education landscape, specifically in elementary, just because there are so many standards and there's so many things that they're learning all at once and not just from each specific teacher, it's unclear to a parent sometimes what is it that they're doing in the classroom and what are all these things that are kind of, enveloped into one. So I think breaking it down in a way that makes them understand it and makes it more clear, because I would have never thought about it like that either. Like, oh, it's all these components of the car that like put it together and
Yeah.
make it run in the way that you want it to run. And so I think those tools are really, really important.
And I think it's just about we're not replacing the teacher, right? We're just augmenting what is possible for them. And this is where AI does the best, right? If you give it something that's known, and then it's just kind of modifying the language so it can be more understandable. Some of the jargon or the highly technical language that are these standards. Hey, can you explain this to me? Like, can you explain it to the kids? Can you explain it to this? Like this type of help, we see it. And we really see AI and Otus overall being that assistant that every K-12 educator deserves. I always thought it would be amazing. Imagine if every K-12 educator had 2 or 3 graduate assistants helping them do all of the things they're tasked to in the classroom. And that's what we really see as the benefit of Otus. Otus is a
Mm-hmm.
tool equipped with this AI that's going to be able to do that. It's going to be your assistant in these variety of ways, clearing away your ability to then really connect and understand what your kids need.
Which, being former educators, is the most important part, right? Is being
It's the
able to
most
have
fun
that
part.
connection. Yeah. It's the part that you love. And I think in my opinion of AI is probably different than most people's. Obviously, I think it's an amazing tool, and I think it's really going to change the way that everyone operates. But I think what it really does is it brings, when it's in a classroom situation, is that it's bringing the joy back to teaching, because I think it's taking away those things that are just so they're just really time sucks, right? They just really suck your energy and time away from you, that you don't get the, once you're done doing all the things you have to do, you're just like, ugh, I'm over the day. Let's just wrap it up and let's just go home. Instead, you can come back to teaching. And I've heard it from a lot of teachers who have adapted AI into their classroom. They're like, oh, I just feel more joy. I feel more spark. I feel more time that I can actually innovate and really, bring back the love of teaching, not only for myself, but for my students. And my students are feeling it. And I think that's the narrative that AI brings to the table.
Thank you, Netta. You said it better than me. That's exactly right. There's nothing better than that aha moment you can have with a kid, right? If all of a sudden you help them unlock something or they've learned something and their pure joy and elation is infectious. And we just need to be able to have more moments like that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the work that you're doing, obviously, is being able to, really help alleviate that from teachers. Now, a kind of spicy question I like to ask is, we've seen AI just change in like literally just a couple of years, right? Like it's insane how much it's changed and how much capability it's unlocked for educators in the classroom and for ed tech companies and providers. But where do you think in 5 years? I would say 10, but I think 10's too long. I think in 5 years, where do you think we're going to see, these tools, and what do you dream of seeing in 5 years?
Yeah, I think it's going to be able to be we call it an insight assistant. It's going to allow you to ask questions. Like it can do that today. I think in the next 5 years, it's going to be able to help you see trends and historical performance if you have the data. And again, this is where candidly we feel like we're positioned to utilize these tools well. I also think it's just going to be able to be, it's called agent AI use, right? This ability for it to actually do things. I think you're really seeing it. I think it's interesting when you watch, it's like what information and what tools are you going to give it access to? And some of those in the classroom, I think, are a little bit hard, right? Because I don't think it's going to be able to really connect to students. I don't think that can happen. But I think we're just going to see it really embedded into these tools. And so I think it's going to be, and it's funny because I feel like this was a question set up for us. But again, Insight Assistant being able to ask questions that are already visualized for you. A data assistant, the ability for you to ask questions of all the information you have. I think something else that we're working on, and it's actually I can't even think more than 5 years because this is coming out this summer in the fall. We're going to have an AI curriculum assistant where we
Mm.
can actually recommend, we're actually partners with Discovery Education, and we're going to be able to recommend, content in a much more tailored and personalized way so that it's like, oh, you love Major League Baseball? Like, well, here is a really good math activity. Or you love the Marvel superheroes? Here's a really good literacy activity based upon some of your performance. So I think we're going to see the realization of multiple assistants equipped to every K-12 educator, but I also think that's going to happen for the administrators. You're going to have a research assistant, a data assistant. You're going to have the families to be able to have somebody, I look at all that I have to manage for my kids. Well, how can I be more efficient? And I think we're going to see other industries. They're always, unfortunately, in edtech. Edtech's always a touch behind. In some ways, that can be good to be measured and patient. So I think we might see other industries get there like a year or two earlier, but then it's going to come to education right after. And so I think you're going to really see more time. Back to what we said, we're going to have more of those joyful moments.
Yeah. And I think ed tech is slower, but that's because education is slower. So you have to be, we're actually, we actually, in terms of education and the classroom, are at an exponential speed. And that is just like an infinite speed of what is happening in big tech. But I think it's good for us to be cautionary when doing that because if we move too quickly, it can be dangerous.
Yeah, and unfortunately in ed tech, there have been some moments where we've been burned, right? Been burned by these tools. We talked about all the reasons why. Tools that might not have the financial, longevity to be able to realize it, or tools that promise something that they fell short to deliver. And so we want to make sure, at Otus, we want to make sure that we are listening and learning, but we're, under promising, over delivering. And it's something that we have to make sure we're there and supporting the educators because there have been too many times, too many failed initiatives, too many times like that. And that's really why, again, I'm excited. I think in the next 6 to 18 months, we're going to see time given back and we're going to see some of these things happen. We just really need to again, we need to engage with the educators and families to make it happen.
Yeah, well, I am really excited to see it and can't wait to, hear more about it and catch up with you hopefully in 6 to 8 months and see how everything is going. But I just want to say how much I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your insights from being a teacher and educator into building a platform that educators love. Well, and
Thank you.
administrators too, right?
Yeah. Everybody involved. No, I really appreciate it. I really appreciated the opportunity. Amazing conversation. So thank you. And thanks to everybody listening.
Yeah, thank you. And then if somebody is wanting to find more information about Otus, where is the best place to go and how could they, learn more information and maybe even connect with you?
Definitely. So the best way to learn more about Otus is to go to our website, which is otus.com. So I like to think of it as organizing technology for us because we're all involved in this together. So we want to organize technology for us, otus.com. And then the best way to connect to me is via LinkedIn. It's a great way to kind of connect to me. And I really do like to be able to connect to former educators or people in the education looking. I always like to give back. And I've been very fortunate and I always like to be able to do the same for others.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And we'll make sure we link all of those great notes down below so you can find that really easily and quickly. Thank you again so much, Chris, for coming on today.
Thank you very much.
All right, everyone. We will see you guys next time. Bye. Thank you so much. You've made it this far. We are so thankful that you're here. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, thumbs up, comment below, and join us for all of our next videos. Thank you so much for joining us as we disrupt education together. See you guys soon. Bye, everybody.